Salutations gamers, I'm the OgichiGame, and today I'm going to be talking about something which was absolute crap. Now, I recently just beat the Abyss Watchers, the boss in Dark Souls 3, first Lord of Cinder that you come across. Now, unlike a lot of the other bosses in Dark Souls as a series as a whole, this is probably the worst boss I've ever fought in any of the games, including Bloodborne. This game was, well, there's a number of issues I'm having with this game in particular, but maybe I'll talk on that more later. Right now, I just want to point out the Abyss Watchers and why I think, personally, it fails pretty miserably as a boss. Now, I'm not talking about the fact that the Abyss Watchers is easier, difficult, or whatever. The Abyss Watchers is definitely difficult. But the Abyss Watchers being difficult is not the problem that I have with the boss. I love having difficult boss battles in Dark Souls. Whenever I play Dark Souls, I love to have a difficult boss battle. It's not about the Abyss Watchers being difficult. It's about how they're difficult. You see, unlike a lot of the other bosses that you'll find throughout the Dark Souls series, there's always this level of difficult yet fairness in every single one of the bosses. There's always something you can use to your advantage. Every single boss, the more you fight, the more you die trying to fight a boss, the more you start to understand how they work, how they move, everything. You understand the boss more and more the more you fight it. And eventually, maybe in a couple tries or whatnot, maybe in a few hundred tries, depending on how difficult the boss may be, you will eventually figure out exactly how to fight it, how to beat it. Now, the Abyss Watchers is a little different than that. A little bit different. Yes, I did have to die a lot, like a typical boss, in order to understand him a lot better. However, the problem with the Abyss Watchers is that you are always fighting two, even after the transformation. Also, I'm assuming that everyone who's watching this video already understands the boss battle, has seen the boss battle, or done the boss battle or whatnot, and understands how the boss battle goes. So, if you haven't though, spoilers. But yes, there is a transformation that occurs after you take the Abyss Watchers down, all the way down, and then he comes back, and it's horrible. It's absolutely horrible. Even after that transformation, you are still technically fighting two opponents. Basically, what they're trying to do is they're trying to recreate the difficulty that a lot of people had when fighting Ornstein and Smaug. But there's a great difference in that fight. With Ornstein and Smaug, in that fight, there was definitely two very tough opponents. By themselves, each one would have been a tough boss battle. However, there was the two of them that fought you at once. And that was very, very hard for a lot of people. But there was still a level of fairness in that Ornstein and Smaug were two different people with different attacks, different strategies. And even though they worked somewhat in unison, they didn't work that much in unison. And there was a way to exploit the way that each of them attacked, to split them up so that you could take down one and then fight the super version afterwards. Now, there is a way to exploit the boss, the Abyss Watchers, which is, there is a third. So, in the fight, I'm sure everyone already understands that as you're fighting the Abyss Watchers, another one comes up and he starts to fight alongside the Abyss Watcher. That's not fun whatsoever, I can tell you that much right now, because you are fighting two of the exact same person. The exact same person. Now, the Abyss Watcher, if you were fighting one Abyss Watcher by himself, just not even after the transformation with the flaming sword and everything, just the plain old, straight up Abyss Watcher from the get-go, just one, He would have been a tough but fair enemy like a lot of bosses throughout the Soul series, including Bloodborne. However, they decided to throw in a second one. And that made things a lot harder on everybody, but in a bad way, because the Abyss Watchers are unfair in a lot of their attacks. Playing through, fighting them as many times as I did, I noticed that there was a number of attacks that were essentially unavoidable. In that, if you were close enough to be hit by his sword, you were going to be hit mostly regardless of whether or not you dodged. And because a lot of his attacks he would swing a bunch of times in one go, even if you did time it perfectly to dodge the first swing, he hit you with every other swing preceding. Unless you managed to get just far enough away that you could keep out of his range. And then, so, with that in mind, having that kind of level of difficulty in the way that he's fighting, he would have been a tough but fair boss just by himself. However, by throwing in the two of them, now you have the issue that you essentially, if you get... It's practically impossible. I'm sure it's possible, but it's practically impossible to fight the two of them at the same time. Because once one hits you, the other hits you, and then the other, and the other, and the other, and they just pound you into the dirt in between them. It is just a sandwich with you as the meat, and somebody taking a hammer and beating it to death. That's a very strange analogy, but that's basically what happens. So the only way to actually win the first section of the battle is to essentially just run around in a circle, avoiding taking damage, so that you have the most amount of health and the most amount of Estus for the second half of the battle. And you just hope that the red-eyed guy, after a while, beats him. You hope that he can do it quickly, but you mostly just wait for the red-eyed guy to fight him and take him down so that you can fight the second half of the battle. And that is crap. That is garbage. That is a garbage way to have an enemy fighting. To have a boss battle. To have it so that you really can't do much except for avoid the fight. To not fight. That's how you win the fight, by not fighting. And that is not a boss battle. That is not a good boss fight. Avoiding fighting. Now, the second half of the battle is also a lot of bullcrap, and the reason why the second half of the battle is a whole load of bullcrap is because you're still fighting two opponents. Even though you see one opponent, you're fighting two. It was purposefully done in the second half of the battle that when he has the flaming sword, the fire damage comes after the sword. So he will swing the sword, and then the fire will come after. So if you get hit, you'll be hit twice. Which then ends up doing a lot of damage if you get stun-locked and then get hit a bunch. And remember, there are certain attacks that he does that when you get caught in them, you're getting hit over and over and over again until he's done swinging. And it can kill you that second, that instant, if he gets you caught in one of those. If you see that him telegraphing that attack, you basically need to back up and hope that you can get out fast enough. Now, that is essentially the whole load of crap that this fight has. The whole load of bollocks. The fact that there's more than one of the exact same person. The exact same person. The attacks that the Abyss Watchers use, there are a number of attacks that are mostly unavoidable, and the only way to really avoid them is to just completely avoid the fight entirely. The first half of the fight, you have to avoid entirely if you want to win. You have to just avoid the entire first half of the fight so that you have enough health and Estus to actually fight the second half of the battle. And in the second half of the battle, you are still fighting two people. Granted, these two are moving, even though you're seeing one, you're fighting essentially two because of the damage that comes afterwards. However, the only fair part about this second half of the fight is that, even though you are technically sort of fighting two people in a way, the way that you're fighting them prevents you from having to avoid a bunch of attacks from everywhere. They are moving in unison, but it's still not very easy to avoid entirely. And of course, in the end of it all, the Abyss Watchers, the thing that I hate the most about the Abyss Watchers is I find them to be very, very uninspired. Very uninspired. All the bosses that have been considered some of the most difficult bosses in the Souls series, the original Dark Souls, Ornstein and Smaug. In Bloodborne, you had in the DLC, Ludwig. Those really difficult bosses, extremely difficult bosses. But they were very cool looking, very inspired. They were unique, so unique. Ludwig, not as much as a lot of everything else in Bloodborne, but still, he was very, very much in his own world. He was a part of that universe. He looked the part. He was a monster. In Ornstein and Smaug's case, they were not monsters like a lot of the other things that you fought in the rest of Dark Souls. However, the fact that you are fighting these golden armored sentries, basically, these golden armored sentries, something that you have yet to see in the rest of the games thus far, and will not see another gold armored sentry looking thing anywhere similar to what they look like, was very, very, very cool. Very cool to look at. It was absolutely amazing to look at them. Their attacks, the way they looked, was amazing. They looked awesome. Same thing with Ludwig, looked very awesome. However, the Abyss Watchers, the thing that I hate the most about them, they just don't look cool at all. They don't look cool. They don't look cool. Their attacks are kind of just, they're just whatever. They're not really all that cool attacks. They don't have any kind of really cool magics or spells, or it's not so much that they don't have any magic. It's that they don't have any really cool abilities. Like Ornstein and Smaug's battle. Ornstein had the lightning spear. He didn't necessarily have magic. He just had a spear with lightning imbued into it. Ludwig had his ridiculous sword that had all that crazy whatever magic stuff on it, that ridiculous sword. But in the Abyss Watcher's case, he has a flaming sword. Which is kind of, I guess it does match up with the whole being a Lord of Cinder thing, but at the same time, it's very uninspiring. It's not all that cool. And the rest of it is, well, very similar to the whole flaming sword. It's really not all that interesting. The attacks aren't all that interesting, and in particular, the Abyss Watchers really don't look good. They don't. And I'm not talking about graphics-wise. I'm not talking about the graphics. The graphics of Dark Souls 3 are absolutely amazing, and the Abyss Watchers are no exception. It's that the Abyss Watchers, they're just not cool looking. They don't have any real interesting design to them. They just look like a couple of guys. And, in particular, not just do they look like a couple of guys, they look out of their element. They look so much, so very similar to something out of Bloodborne. With their hats and the cloaks and the way their swords are, the ridiculous swords and stuff like that. They look so much like a Bloodborne enemy. Well, the swords not so much being ridiculous swords. There's plenty of ridiculous swords in the Dark Souls universe itself, but maybe more on that later. Anyway, though, but they just look like something out of Bloodborne. They look like someone from Bloodborne with the way that they're designed. But not even something cool from Bloodborne. I have a problem with them looking like something out of Bloodborne to begin with. But I also have an even bigger issue with the fact that they don't even look like something cool from that universe. Or this one. They don't look interesting at all. very bland. They're just a couple of knights. And yes, the knights in Dark Souls have always been some of the toughest people that you face as general enemies. But for the most part, you don't fight knights as a boss. One exception that I can think of is from the DLC, you fight... dagnabbit, I can't remember his name right now. But in the DLC of the original Dark Souls, there was one guy who had a busted arm and a giant greatsword who fought you, and he was basically corrupted by the Abyss. That's the one exception I can think of, but also, he was a giant. He was a giant, and his armor looked amazing, and that sword was cool, and the way he fought with the broken arm, limp the whole time, looked awesome. The Abyss Watchers, not so much. Even, there's nothing like that to really redeem anything about their design. They're not interesting. And that's mostly the thing I have the biggest problem with the Abyss Watchers. But in the end, finally beat them. Hopefully the rest of the game will be a lot more interesting. I'm sorry, by the way, that today is not just an episode. I'm hoping that tomorrow I will be able to get an episode out for Saturday on Dark Souls 3. But for today, we're just going to have to leave it at the rant on the Abyss Watchers. I really hated this boss. Absolutely hated this boss. Again, not because of the difficulty, but because of a lot of the other things that I mentioned in this. It's not about the difficulty, it's about how they were difficult, and also about their design. That just makes me absolutely hate this boss. But, anyway though guys, that's all my thoughts for today. If you liked this episode, make sure to hit like on it. Otherwise, I'll see all of you in the next one. Bye-bye!